For our last session of the day, of the second day of the Living Longer Journalism Fellowship, I thought I couldn't let this opportunity pass without sharing a small story about my own first brush with AI. It was at the end of my decade of living in East Africa, and I was starting to think about returning back to the US, and I had my concerns and fears about whether or not I'd be able to come back into a newsroom, because I'd left NPR in 2007 and went first to northern Uganda and then to Kenya. And so I started submitting electronic resumes to various news organizations and other companies in the US. And I would push the send button and literally get up and get a glass of water, and I'd come back and the rejection was already there. And I thought, with my Cro-Magnon brain, I thought, well, they couldn't have read my resume that quickly. How is this happening? It took me months to figure out that the algorithm was spitting me out automatically because of my age. And so I had all this amazing experience, and I lived abroad and thought I was the hottest thing since sliced bread, and the algorithm don't care, okay? So that was my, again, introduction into the challenges of being a member of the aging workforce. And so I think this particular session is probably one, if I can speak for all of you, that we've all been looking forward to hearing and learning more about this issue of AI and how it affects the older workforce. So you have two fabulous speakers who've done research into this, and they're going to present us with the most cutting edge research available. So we're going to start with Lori Trawinski. Lori is the Director of Finance and Employment for AARP. So Lori, please get us started in this conversation.
Thank you, Rachel. And thank you everyone for being here. I do want to share one small thing about myself, and that is I am a professional stand-up comedian. And the person who goes last during the evening is the headliner. So welcome to the headliner session. You will not be disappointed. This may be the most exciting panel of the day. I can say that with certainty. And I'm also very cognizant of the fact that we are the session standing between you and happy hour. But it is my sincere hope that the popsicles will have bought us 90 minutes of pure fun. So welcome. I'm very pleased to be here. And one thing that we didn't talk about just now is the fact that I work at AARP by day, but I teach at NYU by night. And one of the courses I'm teaching right now is a course in human capital technology. And we spend a lot of time talking about the developments in the AI systems. So I have much to share with you today. So one of the things I like to start with, we often throw terms around without thinking about exactly what we mean. So I always like to start with the definition. When we use the term artificial intelligence, what are we really talking about? So, this definition says it's an activity devoted to making machines intelligent. And intelligence is that quality that enables an entity to function appropriately and with foresight in its environment. So the quick summary of this is computers are learning, computers are making decisions, and computers are making predictions. So those are three important things to think about, because we're going to talk a little bit later about how HR hiring processes have been impacted by the use of artificial intelligence. So the other thing that's important to think about is there are different types of artificial intelligence. So it consists of, 4 different levels of programming. So with machine learning, this is a type of AI that provides computers with the ability to learn things. It will take in a large data set. They will attempt to look for patterns in the data. And when you do this, sometimes you have a programmer who is supervising the parsing of this data. You might have a programmer who is analyzing the patterns. And sometimes with more recent AI, they just let it fly. And at the end of the day, you might find correlations and patterns that you never would have thought to look for if you were actually doing the programming. The next level is natural language processing. And so this is when the computer looks at written words or even verbal communications and attempts to learn from the language that it's looking at. And it attempts to understand tone and context, and it attempts to replicate a human interaction. So an example of where we see this is when you go to a site to apply for a job and a chat bot pops up and says, hey, are you looking for a job? And then if you answer yes, it'll say, tell me about yourself. You know, what area are you interested in? And you start to feel all excited. You're like, wow, someone's really on the other end. No, it's a computer, and it's, you know, sucking information out of you so that it can feed it into a model or make a decision about you when you actually apply for the job. Another way we see this is, you know, you might go to an online FAQ and, you know, it'll say type your question and then the answer will pop up. So it's another example of how natural language processing is being used to answer questions without having to bother the humans who used to answer these questions. So the next level of AI is this, what we call deep learning. And this is really a series of machine learnings that build upon one another, or it could even be natural language processing, but it's extra, you know, layers and decision upon decision that the computer is making. So you get deeper and deeper into algorithms and various decisions. We see this a lot in the area of medical diagnosis. I don't know if you've gone for a test recently. An example is a mammogram. You will have a radiologist who will read the mammogram, but then they will also put it through a computer, and they tell you, you know, that the diagnoses and detection of abnormalities is much better when you use the computer than relying only on a human to do that. So there's some good things. We use it also for language translation and also stock market trading signals, and you know, so we already know the algorithms are everywhere. And then the next level of AI is what we call the neural networks, and this is where the systems are patterned after the neurons that attempting to replicate how the human brain works. And again, we get into much more detailed, you know, filtering of knowledge and levels of decision making and like a hierarchy of decision trees. So again, and this is used in facial recognition technology or handwriting recognition. So as we, you know, and a lot of us, I don't know if you've had the opportunity to watch the film Coded Bias, but it's a phenomenal documentary about how facial recognition technology can misread people or not read people at all. And it also shares a lot of examples of how various governmental agencies in different countries are using facial recognition technology to do things that average people and citizens are not aware is actually happening. So if you have free time and have an extra hour and a half sometime, Coded Bias, a fabulous, fabulous documentary. Now, one of the things I like to talk about when I'm teaching about artificial intelligence is that there are advantages and there are pitfalls. And so I can find articles for you that will demonstrate various ways where you can use AI to mitigate bias. But because I'm an economist, I can also share with you lots of articles that tell you how artificial intelligence can exacerbate bias and make it worse. And so the answer is, you know, is it helpful? Is it good? And the answer is it depends. It might be, but you really need to do some work to investigate how it's being developed, who's developing it, what data is being input into the models, and, you know, ultimately, are you doing other tests to see if the results you're getting make any sense. So the areas that we often see problems are the input data. You may have heard a story about how Amazon built a resume sorting algorithm, and it ended up not hiring any, not pointing to any women as hireable. And the reason was the data that went into it was made up of mostly men. And so it looked for characteristics that men have. So, things like having played lacrosse or, things, sports that women don't play. And then they were like, oh my gosh, it's not pointing to, any women are qualified. And, upon further investigation, they determined that, they were using a data set that was biased. And so, it's like, how do you fix that? How do you address that? There's also programming quality. Who is doing your programming and what biases may they have? We all have bias. Some of it's conscious, some of it's unconscious. And if you're not aware that there could be bias, you don't know what you're getting. And also, we often hear the story that there are not as many women programmers as there are men. There are not as many people of diverse backgrounds, different races and ethnicities, sexual orientation, gender. And so when you look at that kind of diversity, if you can create a programming group that has diversity where people can share ideas and thoughts and perspectives about how you're developing these programs and what inputs you're looking at, you might end up with a less biased model. But if you're not willing to do that, you may not even know. The other issue with AI is this idea of the black box. There are some companies that create things and they really can't tell you how it's generating the answer. And there may not even be a way to test whether the people who they're saying are qualified for a job, for example, do they ever do a test and look at an actual resume and compare it with what the results of the AI are telling them? So in some cases, I would say they probably do not do that. And then finally, there are a lot of issues with data privacy and security. And here's an example. You go apply for a job. There's always a box that you have to check that you agree and consent and all these things. So what do you think they're doing? They're probably building a model, taking your resume, looking at your skill sets and determining, well, you were not qualified, and maybe you're going to feed into the algorithm. So the next time somebody with your background and experience, they're going to filter them out too. Alternatively, if you get hired, you're going to go to a different pool and they're going to say, oh, well, this is what a successful candidate looks like, and we're going to add your data to the system. So these are issues, and they are issues that any company who's adopting a particular tech solution should be thinking about. And especially, I'm going to say, in the hiring space. I think tomorrow you're going to hear from somebody from the EEOC, and then I hope they will share some information with you about the fact that they have formed an advisory committee to look at algorithms in the hiring process. So another thing that seems to be lacking in many companies, and really at the national level, is guidance around ethics in the use of AI. On the international scene, there is much discussion, and I think in Europe there are much stronger guardrails around some of these issues. But as a company, if you're going to bring in AI to do something, you should be thinking about the ethical use of it. You should be thinking about the data protections. You should be creating processes for how people can report suspected problems with it. And the reason why it matters is risk. So, you can destroy your company brand with an AI snafu. You can face regulatory enforcement actions if you violate laws. Legally, you can be sued. And finally, if you spend the time to think about AI in the proper way, to look and make sure that you've covered the bases before you bring it into your company, you can increase efficiency. I mean, we know in the HR space that an AI program can sort and screen resumes many times faster than a human being can. So you can go through many more resumes much more quickly. But if you don't know what your AI is doing, if you don't understand what the program is doing, you could be cutting out many, many qualified applicants. So now the main part of my chat is really going to be about how we're seeing AI being used within HR hiring systems. And so I have created this fabulous list that talks about every aspect where we can see AI being utilized. And it starts right at the job description level. So today, there are companies out there that will take a look at your job description and examine it for biased language. So it can examine gender bias and tell you if your job description is written in a way that would discourage women to apply for jobs. We can see it also with older workers. If you start posting jobs where you say you want somebody who's energetic, and you know, a lot of times older people will self-select out of that process. And David Newmark has recently released a paper where he actually took job descriptions and wrote them to be biased against older people, and then wrote a job description that is not biased and put the ads out there and found fewer older applicants for the jobs that had the biased language. I will say, we didn't need him to do that study because we already know we're AARP, and we know that there is bias against older workers, and I think you probably already heard about that. But the idea that there are now technologies out there that will take your job description and evaluate it for gender bias. It'll also do race and ethnic bias. I think there are some that are expanding into LGBTQ and other types of bias. So if you are getting ready to hire somebody, some of the tools are actually free. So you can check it out and see how your job descriptions turn up. But we have 11 million jobs open in the United States today. And that's a lot of jobs, and there's a lot of employers that need people to do this work. And so start with your job description and see who you're leaving out because of how you wrote the job. Advertising. So we've also heard about how Facebook was hired, somebody hired Facebook to send out job descriptions, and they said only send them to. And guess what? They cut out people of different races and ethnicities and older workers. And then there was a lawsuit. And Facebook said, well, we're just doing what the client wanted to do. We didn't break any laws. But it's a fuzzy area. I believe Facebook won in that case, but people are looking at that. Back, I think it was 2016, Lisa Madigan, the Attorney General of Illinois, investigated Monster.com and Indeed and places like that because they were posting jobs that were cutting out older people. And she did an investigation and called it out, and hopefully some of those practices have gone away. The other thing about filtering older workers is, many recruiters use LinkedIn. And I've had my students tell me, you can set any filter you want. So they can filter you out if you have more than 5 years of experience or 10 years of experience. They can filter you out if LinkedIn used to require graduation date. I think they may have pulled back on that, but they could filter you out by looking at your graduation date. So even though it may be illegal, it's really tough to prove, and the filters are there. And so, we don't know what recruiters are actually doing when they select certain filters. Sourcing, again, this You can hire a tech company to provide you with automatic job postings to different job boards. You can select who gets them and who doesn't in terms of what the various job boards specialize in. With screening, I just talked about that. You can screen out anybody based on any characteristic. We're seeing AI being used for scheduling. Have you ever received a notice that says, "Hi, I'd like to meet with you. Here's the link," and it opens up a calendar and you can click on it and say when you're free, and you don't even have to talk to a person. So they're using that to schedule HR interviews. And interviewing. Okay, so this is one of my favorite things to talk about. Have any of you done a video interview? And when I say video interview, I don't mean someone's live on the other end. I mean, they send you an email and they say, sign in at this time. You're going to be given 3 questions. You may or may not have more than one opportunity to record the question. You may have unlimited time to record the question. It generally takes about an hour. Anybody done this? Yes? Okay, how did you like that? Yeah, so I had the experience of one. And for me, it was the worst scenario. Take it, you can re-record as many times as you like. 3 questions. And how long do you think it took Lori to do this? It should take less than an hour. 3 hours. 3 hours. And you record it, and then you can submit it or not. And so then, what I realized much later is that was probably part of their analytics. They're like, this woman took 3 hours to answer 3 questions. That should have taken 10 minutes because each question's not more than a minute. I am a bit of a perfectionist, and I kept saying, no, I could do better. But they analyzed me. But the other thing about the video interview is they were also analyzing my word choice, my tone, my cadence. They were probably analyzing my eyes and where I was looking and how confident I appeared. And then they put my info into the database and compared me with their successful employees, and they were like, ooh, we don't want this one. And so like, I knew they were going to be looking at me. I knew they were going to, listen to what I said. I didn't realize at the time that every pause, how I said something, everything about me could have been analyzed in 50 million different ways. So that's, it's mind-blowing. Now, and I keep hearing, oh, well, companies aren't doing that. But then I hear, oh, lots of them are. Did you get hired doing that? No? No. But you know what? They have your data, and they're using you to decide who to hire next time. They should be paying us for this. I just apply for jobs for fun sometimes because I think it's really interesting to go through this process. It reminds me of when, much like Rachel, so we know that computers are screening our resumes and they're looking for keywords and things. Well, now they're doing more than that. They're interpreting what our skill set is. So I read an article. It said, take your resume, put your skills up front, and don't make it fancy. It'll be very machine readable. Put your skills up front. So I'm like, I know the secret sauce to getting in the door. So I redid my resume. I put the skills on top, and within 30 seconds got an instant email that said, you are matched to the position you applied for. And I was like, oh my God, this is a miracle. This was a Sunday night at 10 o'clock. By 9:30 Monday, I got the email. Yeah, thanks, but no thanks. And, and I'm like sitting there going, okay, so did somebody come into the office at 9 a.m., pull out Trawinski's resume, make a big decision, and then send her the email? I don't think so. I think there was something else in there that did it. And I don't know what it is, but I continue to do these experiments. And like I said, I had great success getting matched. So the question is, how do you go beyond getting matched and getting asked for a chat? So for hiring, We are actually seeing very few companies do hiring over the phone. There's an example I've read about where Amazon, for certain warehouse jobs, has someone call in, press certain buttons on the phone, and they can get a job offer by the end of the phone call without speaking to a human being. Now, they have announced that this is like, a really great thing. I personally think it really takes the human out of the human resources, and I would argue that's not a way most companies would want to go. But we are actually hearing cases where there's no human involved. Candidate tracking is a super important area in the hiring process. If you have a hiring process that has lots of rounds of interviews and things like that, people will drop out of the process before they get to the end. And so we're seeing the use of AI to send messages to people, ask them how they're doing, see if they're still interested. So it's another way to stay engaged with people without having the HR person to actually have to do it. Onboarding, we're seeing technologies that will send people the forms they need. In some cases, they'll answer the questions. If you have a question, they'll send you to the chat bot, and it's a way to speed up onboarding. There are softwares now and use of AI for coaching. There are programs out there that will sit with a coach, record the session, and then send the coach an evaluation about opportunities the coach missed to help the employee. There are platforms out there to help coaches connect within the company and to just facilitate one-on-one training with people. And what we are starting also to see are actually automated coaches. That's just starting to happen, and I'm not saying I want to be coached by a computer, but we are seeing people working on that. And then finally, networking. So there is an area in the HR tech space called organizational network analysis. And there are entire books and courses devoted to this. And what they do with O&A, it can be passive or it can be active. Passive would be they're going to go into your email and your voicemail, and they're going to pull out the words and do sentiment analysis and see, are our employees happy? Are they disgruntled? Are they upset? What kind of, who are they meeting with? What level of employee is meeting with other employees? You might find out that certain employees never meet with anybody above their level, while certain other employees are meeting with VPs and SVPs and executives. So you can learn about your organization by seeing who people are meeting with and who people are talking about. But when you get down to the ethics of it, do your employees know? Now there's, active O&A where you would do a survey and ask people some of these questions, and they provide the information to you. So that's a different experience. But what I say to everybody is, when you are in your office and you are communicating on Teams or any other channel or any other employer communication method, your employer may know and see exactly what you're saying. So with that, my last thought for you all is, what's the story here? I would hope that this discussion has left you with many thoughts about things you might be able to write about, including things like who's being left out. How many people know that HR systems are sorting resumes in this way? How many people are getting training on that? There are some elite schools that train people about how to apply for jobs. If you don't go to an elite school or you're an older worker, how do you know? Where do you gain those skills to learn how to fill out a job application that's going to get picked up by the AI system? So there are things like that. With the video interviewing, if you are someone who may have a stutter or not enjoy public speaking, what are you going to look like in a video interview? Or what if you have autism and you have a different way of communicating and a different way of interacting with people? Are you going to have any chance at ever being hired? So these are the things that I think we're not talking enough about. So thank you.
Our next speaker is going to share the research and the results of research into AI and longevity that was conducted by the MIT Age Lab research group. So, Chai-Woo Lee, please take.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm realizing that I'm literally the standing roadblock to happy hour, but I hope that this is going to be interesting. I think my presentation will be complementary to what Lori's been talking about, but a little bit broader in terms of the topics that are covered, the domains, the areas that will be covered during the presentation. So I'll be speaking about a research that we did pretty recently on the topic of AI and longevity, so how these two intersect. And thinking about the different areas that will be impacted by longer lives, as well as increased use of AI, the different types of applications that we might see, and the issues that might arise at the intersection. Before I do that, I'll just talk for a minute about what we're doing at the Age Lab. So our vision is 100 years of quality living. So we do academic research to think about what it means for the population to be aging. And we look at it as not a problem to be solved, but as an innovation opportunity. So thinking about what are some of the future possibilities, what are some of the new questions that will arise, what are some of the new solutions, new ideas that we need to think about. And what's really key to our research is to understand the role of technology in navigating longevity and thinking about improving convenience, improving health and safety, and also improving access to different services. So thinking about what can technology do and what needs to be done to make sure that values are delivered. So we really try to think beyond the health and safety needs. And we really see that when you talk about technology for older adults, technology for an aging population, it really gets, there's a high focus on safety technologies, health devices, and a lot of discussions get around the basic needs for survival. But we do realize that there's needs for connectivity, for social engagement, for making contributions, for continued learning and leaving legacy. So we try to think about these higher needs as well. So rather than thinking just about staying healthy and staying safe and staying alive, thinking about what are some of the needs around convenience, connectivity, care, continuing to create and contribute. And when we view technology, our focus is not on developing devices or solutions, but more around understanding people's experiences. So thinking about older adults as well as future older generations and thinking about what are some of the factors that go into how people experience and use technology? So going beyond the individual, but also thinking about the social context, the market conditions that are associated with that, and thinking about the different decision points and stages of adoption that might be involved. And we think about all kinds of different domains, which will lead into the research that I'm going to talk about. But we think about how different applications, different domains, different areas might be affected by aging of the population, thinking about how people get around, thinking about transportation technologies that are emerging right now and how that's going to change our communities, thinking about home technologies and home services and the logistics around that, thinking about family caregiving, the jobs that family caregivers are doing informally without getting paid. What are some of the implications as we experience a caregiver shortage? What can technology do to overcome some of those burdens? And thinking about retirement and future planning. How are people thinking about themselves in the future, and how do we drive behavior change so that people are better planned? So in this study, we again looked at the intersection of increased use of AI and increased longevity, and realizing how there will be new technologies entering our lives. They will disrupt the existing industries, potentially create new applications in different domains. So we looked at 5 domains in this study mainly. So we looked at finance and financial services and retirement planning. We looked at health and caregiving, both from a formal, clinical, and informal perspective. We looked at information and communication, so how people search information and how people interact socially. thinking about community and infrastructure, so mobility solutions, community solutions, home solutions, and also the workplace. And we did a two-part study. So we did an expert panel study with 25 people. So these are people who are working in the field of AI. And we had a pretty even split of people who were kind of working on the technical side of AI and also working on the social and application-related side of AI. And we also had a consumer sample of 911 adults across the US, coming from all sorts of different backgrounds, from all 50 states, representing a diverse group of the population. And we asked these people about future applications, their willingness to use AI, experts' prediction of people's willingness to use AI, and likelihood of future scenarios and what their outlooks are. So one of the questions that we asked about was on consumer knowledge. And we did also ask about the more objective knowledge. Do people know correctly? That didn't really give us a whole lot of meaningful data. But so what we really looked at was after giving people a definition that was kind of assembled from definitions that are out there from different sources, we asked them about their self-rated level of knowledge. Given this definition, how knowledgeable are you of AI? And we saw some generational differences, some gender gaps, some income gaps, as well as differences in terms of people's past experiences with technology, their level of education. But generally, we're seeing that younger adults are more confident about what they know. This doesn't reflect their actual knowledge. And we see, not from this research, from other research that we've done on similar topics, that self-rated knowledge and actual knowledge don't always correlate that well. But what we also know is that the self-rated knowledge is a strong driver for adoption. So I will come back to this later, but we're seeing some big gaps in terms of how older and younger adults differ in terms of their confidence in knowledge. We also asked about general benefit and risk perception, as well as going into different domains as well. When we asked about benefits, so how beneficial do you think it is to use AI generally, as well as in the 5 different domains? People are saying that it feels somewhat to quite beneficial, and this is where we actually see some age differences and gender differences. And when we ask about risk, so how risky do you think it is to use AI? And this was asked to consumers. People are uncertain. So their answers kind of average right in the middle, and it's consistent across generations, across participants of all kinds of different characteristics, which is a reflection of people really not knowing what risks there might be. So in the survey and in the expert study as well, we saw some promises and benefits, and people had moderately high acceptance. Experts had pretty high confidence in AI across the 5 domains. Some benefits that were mentioned included things like making financial services more accessible, making retirement planning more approachable, helping older adults stay socially engaged, and managing some decisions that are key to managing transitions in life. Also supporting medical professionals as well as family caregivers. And there's some typos here, but increased connectivity and convenience in community environments, and also developing and designing cities and urban areas, and also supporting and automating administrative and analytical tasks in the workplace. However, we also saw from this study that there are so many issues to be addressed and solved. So one thing that we were really surprised by was that we might be looking at a near future where there's a wide adoption gap happening. And the one aspect where we might see that gap is between how technology might get pushed to the end users and be met by resistance. So we saw that experts across all 5 domains, across all kinds of scenarios we gave them, experts really overestimated consumer willingness to use AI in all kinds of different contexts. Experts had very high confidence. They thought that consumers will be really welcoming the technology, whereas consumers were not sure. And that was even more true for older adults and people who were lower income, less educated. So this might be putting into potential lag where technology gets pushed, but people don't like it. And we're already seeing some examples of that. For example, in the smart home area where sensors get introduced, different devices get introduced, but people don't know what to work with, or people have privacy concerns, cost concerns, and they're not willing to use them. Also, again, we're seeing some differences among the consumer samples. So some big differences between demographic groups, between people of different experiential characteristics, having different reactions to AI. So this might be suggesting to a near future where access might greatly differ between consumer segments. And also diversity inclusion. And we already talked about this today, I guess, but we also saw from this study that the benefits of AI, even though there are pretty big promises that are out there, some benefits that people are perceiving, they might not uniformly reach people of different characteristics. So this is responses from the expert group when we asked which demographic group will most benefit from AI. And I think the time frame that we gave them was in 10 years, so kind of in the near foreseeable future. And what the response that we got was that the benefits will first go to people with higher income, people in urban areas, early career individuals, people of racial majority, so white people in the US, people with more education, and younger people. So kind of, and we also got some comments from experts saying that in the short run, AI might be actually, and AI has the potential to increase access, but in the short run, we might be seeing AI actually exacerbating some of the digital divide that already exists out there. Also, some challenges that we see across different domains, and this graph right here is actually focusing in on the workplace. So we asked experts, we gave them different scenarios that might happen in the near future, and we asked them to rate how likely do you think this will happen in the next 10 years. And how you read this graph is on the top. So towards the top are scenarios that were rated as more likely, and towards the bottom are scenarios that were rated as less likely. And you can kind of see at the bottom of the graph, these are the social factors. So improving social interactions, intergenerational connections in the workplace, increasing the value of aged employees in the workplace, and help eliminating bias and discrimination in the workplace. And these were rated as least likely. And the more likely scenarios were things like improving efficiency and increasing emphasis on technical skills and supporting administrative tasks. So AI can have some benefits, but there are challenges that we see across domains with biases that might be in place. We also had a discussion around from the experts mostly, and also from the consumers around regulation, policy, and governance of AI. And when we ask consumers what's your level of support for development and implementation of AI? Do you think it should be accelerated or decelerated? Consumers are overwhelmingly positive in terms of support for acceleration of AI. So people believe that it should be developed generally, but also when we asked about the need for regulation, there was an overwhelming amount of consensus around there should be a high level of regulation with this development. And this was consistent across generations as well as across other demographic groups that we had. Also, we asked experts policy recommendations around AI implementation. And a lot of experts talked about things like workforce education and training and requiring ethics review for development and implementation of AI. And people have talked about how this is a responsibility for not just the developers and programmers, but also how organizations who are using AI and implementing AI in their practice, and it's also their responsibility too. So ethics practice and training of who's implementing, who's purchasing, who's using AI systems, these are all responsibilities that need to be shared. So not so much stories to think about, but some of the topics to consider. And I really think that as journalists, you have such potential to improve some of the issues that we see out there and address some of the questions that we're facing. And consumer education is a big part of it. So in this study too, the reason that we didn't really get reliable results from the objective knowledge and understanding of AI was that people's responses were just everywhere. So when we asked consumers, how would you define AI? What are some of the key features of AI? What are some of the examples that you know? Their answers were really everywhere. There was no consensus among the consumers around what AI is and how AI manifests in different domains. And we see that in different domains as well. So outside of this research, we've also been doing a pretty big multi-year survey of people's acceptance towards self-driving technologies. And we're seeing that people's knowledge of self-driving technologies is on a steep decline. And the majority of consumers out there have incorrect knowledge of what self-driving is and what it's capable of. And that's affecting people's expectations towards the future. So what people know or don't know right now and over and under confidence about what they may or may not know is really affecting their future perceptions. And when we ask people about new technologies and ask people, have you seen anything or heard anything on this topic that have affected your perception, your knowledge, that have formed your knowledge of this topic? Overwhelmingly, people will cite the media. So people will see that, oh, there was a self-driving crash and it wasn't self-driving, but it will get reported as self-driving, and that's what forms people's perceptions around the technology. So some responsible and accurate reporting of what AI is in different domains. So sometimes when smart home technologies are discussed, when automated interviewing is discussed, what is it exactly, and how would consumers understand what the capabilities are? And also tailored messaging for different types of end users, so older users, younger users, people in different areas, as well as not just the end users, but the purchasers and distributors of the technology as well. Another key takeaway is that based on the scenarios that we developed through this study and based on the scenarios that were evaluated by both consumers and experts, technologies to support older adults and AI applications to support an older population doesn't have to be things that are specifically designed for them. And we see that when AI gets discussed in terms of older adults, it really goes down to monitoring, fall detection, behavior detection, but it could be something that can support everyone with some specialized use cases for older adults. Some thinking about the general and universal use cases and applications and not really assuming what their needs might be, but getting over those stereotypes, which is key for developers, but also to foster communications around these as well. And having an inclusive approach to AI development implementation, and Lori mentioned this very well in terms of there needs to be a more inclusive approach to developing these algorithms. And also, I think in the last session, this was discussed as well, but knowing that the older population isn't a uniform group. So when you think about including older adults in algorithm development, it's not just a single characteristics that had to be added, but thinking about how this is a group with different goals and expectations, different preferences and experiences, and also different characteristics and capabilities as well. That's it.
As, again, when you prepare to get your questions answered, I'd like to jump in really quickly and ask both of you to expand a bit on the opportunities that are missed out on by groups that don't either have the knowledge about AI or aren't exposed to it. I want to understand, other than rather literal examples of AI, maybe screening out people of color or screening out women, but what are some other ways that people are at a disadvantage without knowing about AI? Can you help me understand that a little bit more? Lori?
Sure. So, I touched upon this in my remarks. The idea that, to get a job in today's job market, you really need to understand the kinds of technologies that are being employed to screen you out. And I think there's also an obligation on the part of employers to educate themselves about the bias and how a job description can be written in a way to discourage certain people from applying for jobs. So everyone has a role here. The employers have a role to make sure that they are cognizant that they may be putting out things that are eliminating people from consideration. And you, as someone who's applying for a job, you need to seek out sources of educational information, read articles. I mean, like I said, I discovered the secret sauce of getting matched, but I've yet to discover the secret sauce of getting the interview. So, there's a lot more work to be done, and I think educational institutions, like community colleges, for instance, can really provide a great service by helping people understand how to apply for jobs in this technological age.
Yeah, I would also echo that education is really important, and also not before even getting to training and really teaching about the technicalities of what might go into that process, just raising awareness around it too, to know what to expect, to not be surprised by what they're seeing, and giving exposure to different possibilities and building positive experiences. We find that as key to be more embracing of the changes and different technologies that might be in place for hiring, for the workplace, for different domains. So kind of raising that awareness and giving people kind of a flavor as to what this is going to be like.
Hi, Susan, nice to meet you from Detroit. I wanted to ask, I write a little bit about scams, and one of the things that comes up is the scammers are using some of these technologies to get your information. They'll send you a fake check or whatever, but they start online and they do some of these interviews online. They'll go to Google Docs. What kind of responsibility do employers have or people have to protect people from losing their money through this advancement in technology? It's new. You say people don't understand it. So the scammers take advantage of that.
So what I see a lot of employers doing is putting notices on their websites, letting people know that they do not pay for, it should not cost you any money to apply for a job here. But unfortunately, people only see that if they go to the actual company's website and see that there are these kinds of disclaimers. So AARP does a lot of work around educating people around fraud and scams. And I cannot tell you with certainty that we cover, job scams, but it is certainly something I will take back and share with my colleagues to make sure it's on our radar. But it may already be there. I cannot tell you for sure.
Yeah, and it's not an area that I have thought about in detail, but generally relating to AI and how there are disclaimers and there are terms and conditions, and there are also messages that go out to users of these AI and people who are in this process. But sometimes people don't understand what it's talking about. So when it says, this is not our practice, beware of these scams, sometimes that's not communicated effectively if it's not put in their language or if it's not something that they have encountered before. And also, if someone's in a position to really want something, so if someone's seeking a job, if someone's in need of healthcare solutions or something like that, in need of working with their financial services provider, if they're in need of something, they might just overlook that because there's a more imminent need. And that might just lure them into scammers, fraud. And also, we're seeing that older adults are not the only group that's prone to scams. We see a lot of younger adults falling to fraud, scams as well. But sometimes older adults are more likely to fall victim because sometimes there's really targeted approaches for them, kind of appealing to their emotional side and creating stories that really appeal to older adults. But again, education is a big piece of it. And also when there are disclaimers, when there are terms around these, to be more clear about what this might look like and to give examples and to really walk them through if something happens, this is how you tackle the issue.
Go to Myra, and then we'll.
Yes, I don't know what reflection you can make, but I'm kind of worried that the soft skills might not be measured with the use of this technology. I mean, at least not within the examples you gave. And in that sense, isn't this inherently or natively discriminating against the elder worker because that's where they're strong at, that's where they're good at? So the use of technology will eventually keep on discriminating or keep on, will perpetuate the discrimination.
So possibly, but that's why we're here, because we're expecting many stories to come out of this educational session where you're going to raise these issues and people will become more aware of it. So absolutely.
Yeah, and echoing Lori, that's actually the message that we want to get out from our research as well. So in the workplace portion of our study, we saw that there's a higher resistance toward AI replacing the soft skills, even though there are applications for that, and even though technology's been built around that. That's an area there we might see a higher resistance from the users, and it goes across different domains as well. If soft skills are involved, if interpersonal interactions are involved, that's where people will say, no, I don't want the machine talking to me, I want a person. And across the different domains, I mean, this is one of the main findings that I didn't really get to in this presentation, but whether it's financial services, whether it's choosing where to live, applying for jobs, getting different things in the home, meeting a doctor, people want a more traditional interface, even if there is an AI behind it. So how do you create a more personable and traditional interface? There might be a machine powering it, but how do you still maintain that personal and a more human-like relationship too?
Hi, I'm Lori Valligro with the Bangor Daily News in Maine. I have a two-part question. First is how pervasive is the use of AI in screening for jobs? And Maine has a lot of small businesses, and just wonder if they're able to afford it. The second part is, with the acute workforce shortages, is there some type of broadening of the parameters that are going into these questions to include more people, seniors, former felons?
I think that's a question for you.
Okay. So in terms of small businesses, if a small business is utilizing a particular software to do something, they could be using it to screen. But depending on how small the employer is, they may not. But we are, in terms of broadening the pool of applicants, we are seeing some innovation. So an example is a company called Greystone Bakery in Yonkers, New York. They hire people who are who want to work there via email. You send an email and say, I would like to work there. There is no job application. They do not ask questions. They hire many formerly incarcerated people. They call their model open hiring, and they actually do consulting to teach other organizations how to do it. Now, for many companies, you're not going to fill your whole workforce using an open hiring method. But the challenge that I put before all of my students when I'm teaching is, are there some jobs in your organization where you could use this kind of methodology for hiring? And I think, the short answer is probably, right? We don't need to hire PhDs for everything. No offense. But I'm just saying we can, we can broaden the pool. And there's a lot more, in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space, we're seeing a lot more emphasis on hiring people who are different. A lot of people, some people may have disabilities, some people may have a different neurological challenge, but we are finding employers being willing to try pilot programs and create ways to bring more people into the workplace. So I think, I do think, and I think DEI is helping us get there, the emphasis on those programs.
I'm not really sure of how to even ask this question, but okay, and I have not applied for a job in years, but if I'm gonna be submitting resumes through like one of these interfaces like Indeed or whatever, so are the algorithms then designed by Indeed, or do the employers who are looking for people kind of design their own? And is there any data that shows that older people are systematically disadvantaged by these things, or is it just a black box and you don't really know who's getting selected at these giant kind of clearinghouses?
Yeah, this is not not that I have exact data or anything, but and I don't think it's really disclosed clearly where for different job application sites or the employers who's developed the algorithm, and even if there's an algorithm behind it at all. So it's often case not really disclosed. And it could be the application site, it could be the employer, it could be a third party. The algorithm could have been outsourced. Yeah.
I mean, is there any data that shows whether any class of applicant is like just, disadvantaged by these, algorithms at all? Or is it just like internal to whatever company may have designed the algorithm?
I don't think I've seen data.
So what I can tell you is that, so I mentioned Lisa Madigan, for the Attorney General from Illinois. I think it was back in 2016. She was sending letters to Indeed, to Monster, to these organizations because they had practices that were brought to her attention that she felt were discriminating against older workers. Now, what I wasn't able to find when I was doing research to prepare for this panel was the outcome of those letters that she had sent to those companies. But I think it was 2016, so it was a while ago. And so we knew at that time that there were certain things being done to screen out older people. But it's not just like Indeed is like one small source of resumes. Like LinkedIn is huge. And any company, any large company is probably purchasing software that will enable their recruiters to screen. And so the recruiters actually set the parameters for how they're doing the screening. So, for an Indeed, they might send you a pool of candidates that they say, oh, these are the qualified people. So that's the algorithm that you're asking about. We don't know. And I don't think, and as I do these exercises with my students and I ask them to investigate a particular vendor, no vendor's going to tell you what they're really doing. I always have them ask the question and they always tell me, yeah, they won't tell me. But I think it's worth asking. But the end result is we don't really know much about these algorithms.
Yeah, and I haven't seen actual data on hiring and on workplace management, but applying sort of happenings that I've seen in other domains and applying some of the things that kind of were warned against in different domains. What could happen is that if an algorithm is trained on some of the existing applications, existing resumes, existing success cases, so people who were hired versus people who were rejected, if it was more likely that the hiring pool has younger adults with certain characteristics and certain qualifications, that might be what the AI gets trained on. And it might continue to practice that and continue to decide that, oh, people with this set of characteristics, which might include younger adults, and that might be the decision that it just keeps on making too.
And I just want to add, though, the thing with these algorithms is, so yeah, they're screening you and looking for skill sets. They're also predicting, in a lot of cases, your likelihood of success in a particular job. And so when it starts doing those predictions and it's basing the predictions on a workforce that's largely made up of men or, white men, who's getting left out?
Okay, I think this actually leads to the next question pretty well. Karen Michelle, Public Radio. The reference to the Greystone Bakery is what leads to the next question, because it was founded by, as you know, a Buddhist priest, a Zen Buddhist priest, Bernie Glassman, with the notion of loving kindness. is that an algorithm that's being considered at all in this? I'm curious about the ethics of AI. Dr. Lee, I think this is a question for you. And are some of the considerations other than quantitative being considered and incorporated in the team that's working on this in your team?
Yeah, so what we heard a lot from experts, and we are not really in the practice of developing algorithms or anything, but what we hear from the experts that we have spoken with, that there's a lot of discussions around it, and there's a lot of, because we've seen cases where AI was making discriminating decisions against people of certain characteristics or people in certain situations, depending on different domains. But there's a lot of work being done around that to ensure that there's a more ethical process in terms of how AI is applied and developed. So I would say the hope is there. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Monica from HuffPost, and I have a question. I've talked to employees, job seekers, job seeking coaches who all are talking about how to game the applicant tracking software systems that create this. And I think to what extent are these individual strategies useful at all, to add columns, to load up to copy the job description and put those keywords from the job description in your application? Are those helpful to any extent? It seems really impossible to quantify in any way, unless you got the job. To what extent did it help you?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually heard about situations where if you copy the job description into your resume and you match at a ridiculously high rate, sometimes you'll get eliminated because they think you copied your job description into your resume. So I have heard that. I don't have any data per se, but it's like my story. I created a skill set, that is accurate, and I matched the job I was applying for, but it still didn't help. So I don't know. But I don't know if you have any thoughts. But what I would encourage everyone in the room to do is to apply for jobs all the time, even if you don't want them. Because it's a great experience to understand and to stay on top of, how the world is changing. It's changing rapidly, and you should always be ready to apply for a job so that you understand the current market. I do it for fun.
Any other?
Yes, right here. Hi, I have a question, and this is in relation to skills versus degrees. So how likely do you think that in the near future, the degrees are going to be important? And I'm talking about a bachelor's, a master's, a PhD, versus how much a person knows in regards to technology. And just to give you an example, a friend's kid, one of her children, when he was in elementary school, he was like, oh, I want to go to MIT. I want to study something engineering. And we were like, oh, that's amazing. Now he's a teenager, and he's like, no, he's like, I'm going to go to community college, and I'm just going to learn this because I know that the job of the future doesn't really require a degree and doesn't really require to be in depth for so much. It's more about learning the skill. So I don't know, what do you think about this? How do you see this?
So I do hear that there are employers that are hiring based on skills and not degrees. We know there's a shortage of tech workers, and so there are companies that are creating apprentice programs to help people get the actual programming skills that the company wants. Now, whether we're not going to see, I think there will always be a demand for people with college degrees in certain areas, but I think employers are rethinking whether the college degree equates to the skills they need. And I think in a lot of cases, they don't. So.
Yeah, and still when employers put out job postings, a lot of them still says degree requirements, bachelor's or higher or master's or higher, but also equal experience in some cases. So maybe in current practice too, some of those are getting into consideration. How it gets into AI involved hiring, I'm not sure. Yeah, and it also, I guess, depends on the career trajectory that one person has. And there's also maybe role that AI can play in developing that career trajectory too, and to develop the skill sets and recommending based on where you're headed, these might be the skill sets that you need, and kind of AI guiding the way there too.
Something just occurred to me, like, I'm Laura Portray from Industry Week. What about just networking, like beating the system of AI? Like, I have a friend who does not, she's an immigrant, she doesn't have a college 4-year degree. She was able to get hired at a big manufacturing global company as a recruiter just by like networking, and I'm just wondering if there's still something to be said for that, and companies still look at that. Like if you know someone in the company, or you've met someone, you can give your, bring it to their attention, and you'll pass all those layers of, AI.
So I think there's definitely value in networking, but I can tell you if you want to work at AARP, you can send me your resume, but you're still going to have to go online and fill out the online application. Now, I don't know how we screen people, but with any company, it certainly helps to know somebody on the inside, but it doesn't necessarily mean you get to bypass the whole system. So it just depends.
Yeah, and different employers might also have different preferences in terms of where the employer comes through. There's a lot of employers still offering referral incentives. People still value that networking aspect. Recruiters still have a role. Headhunters still have a role. But it also depends on the propensity of the employer and also the type of the job. And I think we're still too early to see the effect of automated interview and automated hiring if employers are happy about the outcomes. But maybe in the near future, we'll see employers kind of looking back and seeing, the people who came through this channel versus that channel, how does my satisfaction differ, if at all?
We don't have any more questions. Oh, Kim. Wait for the mic, Kim.
I know this topic all too well, but I guess my question for both of you, it's a group of reporters here, and we've been talking about how to apply for jobs and the barriers. If you're writing the headline of the story for a 50-plus, reader wanting to know about this, what is the headline?
I mean, just the fact that if you send in a resume, if you got a rejection, it might not have been someone. It might have been something else. Just to let people know that it's not always the practice that you were experienced with. It might not be a person on the other end. It might have been a whole different set of decisions that's going on, or a whole different set of processes. It's just raising awareness around what might happen, what might have happened, and what you might be foreseeing in the future with future applications, future interviewing processes, and so on. And even when they get to the workplace, what they might be seeing in terms of the processes that are in the workplace, the benefits, all the HR related practices, and how those might be affected by or driven by technology and not just by human decisions.
Or put another way, your next networking opportunity is with a computer.
Right. Thank you.
Or stay home and pull the covers over here. Yeah. Over. As we wrap up today, keep in mind that tomorrow morning they will be meeting with Raymond Peeler of EEOC, a chief legal counsel for them. And he's going to be telling them a bit about the algorithmic fairness initiative that you acquainted me with early on in our connection. So if you could leave the journalists with a couple of things to think about when they're talking with him or asking him questions, what would a fair AI system or interaction look like? What should a journalist look for when it comes to fairness in this issue?
So I would like to know what the EEOC can do to ensure that the hiring systems are not eliminating certain swaths of people. So it's, what are the things the EEOC can put in place or require companies to do before they employ a certain type of AI to ensure that they're not creating or exacerbating bias.
Yeah, and maybe related to that, thinking about how we can ensure that all kinds of different possibilities, combinations, characteristics are considered in developing the algorithms too. Because if an AI system is developed for hiring and it only considers a subset of the population or certain groups of applicants, and if it's built around that, there will be groups that kind of get left out. So how do we make sure that we fill these holes where we might not have the sufficient amount of data or sufficient amount of resumes or applications or experiences to train on?
This has given me a lot of food for thought, and I'm sure that it's given the journalists lots of territory to think about in terms of their coverage. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Lori and Chai Wu for joining us in this session. Thank you so much.